Okay, just so we're all on the same page here, this is the regular weekly version of the game Overthinker. You've probably seen a bunch of other Overthinker videos popping up all over the site this week because we've also been running reaction pieces to big release news and game company press events for E3. But now for your normal Overthinker programming, we're dipping into... wait, what are we doing? Well, that actually sounds like more of the same thing, actually. No, I mean, I do it, it seems like we might be spreading it a little. So what this comes down to is we've been mostly reacting to trailers and new games, with this being an off year without any major showstopper to dominate the conversation and big next generation hardware reveal, evidently on hold for the next one. There hasn't really been anything major for gamers to universally thrill to, but since we are talking about video games, there's plenty for people to get way too idiosyncratically enraged by. And this year, a popular target of disdain has been the evergreen issue of studios holding press events revealing new and upcoming games with trailers that contain little to no actual gameplay, comprised either of arranged cutscenes or in some cases expensively animated sequences that will only ever exist as short-form features used to advertise early builds of the game in this specific context. And even trailers and reveals that do feature actual gameplay often do so in sporadic bursts or as part of montages that reduce them to abstract elements of light and sound rather than representations of their actual selves. Now, of course, it's obvious why some companies would want to present their games this way, especially now that a portion of the public and quote-unquote fandom prosumer press is invited to the show. E3 press events are about generating hype and making a splash, and what amounts to an animated short film can make even a mediocre actual game seem worthwhile. Likewise, it's easy to see why this would be frustrating for people trying to glean actual information from these presentations. What amounts to an animated short film can make even a mediocre actual game look worthwhile. And yet, while I could be a smug, cynical asshole about this and point out that getting mad about a trade show for expensive technology toys, leaning harder into spectacle than substance, is probably at least a little bit about not wanting to be reminded so readily that you are essentially clapping and cheering for a billion-dollar corporation affording you the privilege of watching commercials, I would perhaps instead... Oh? Oh, yeah, right. I guess I did do that. Here's the thing, though. In theory, I don't actually really mind this. First of all, in practical terms, a lot of these games aren't anywhere near close to done, and you don't want to show the underwhelming skeleton of a project or something you don't end up getting to finish. Secondly, a lot of games in the past that have shown gameplay turned out to be just as non-representative, if not more so, because the studios were creating these slick-looking vertical slices of seemingly good gameplay of what turned out to be shit overall titles. So speaking only for myself, but I'm not so much sick of cinematic game trailers as I am sick of bad, boring cinematic game trailers. And if this stuff came out entertaining and less samey and repetitive, I sincerely suspect there'd be a lot less complaining about it. Not that I haven't learned to somewhat ironically appreciate our yearly parade of dev studio animators and cutscene editors busting out the melancholy college music and visual nods to Meshes of the Afternoon, Unshan Andalou, and the finale of Zabriskie Point to gussy up the latest shooty gun bang army war title as a way of saying, look, even though I do this for a living, I did go to film school. Thusly, what I'm given to wonder is whether or not the real deep down source of resentment here isn't about the gameplay-free trailers themselves at all, but what they reveal about the sorry state of what they're trying to sell. After all, gameplay is only one element of a game. A quote-unquote cinematic trailer should theoretically have plenty else to work with, like focusing on things such as story, theme, characters, idea, atmosphere, the chance to tell us why we want to interact with these interactive worlds, yes? Well, sure, unless, of course, the characters are flat to non-existent, or the worlds are bland and generic, or the stories have been retread a dozen times this same year alone, or the themes are muddled, confused, or lacking in depth. Just as the general spectacle of these presentations can sour an audience simply by reminding them too sharply that E3 is a giant monument to conspicuous consumption and little else, the endless deluge of bland, run-together cinematic trailers forces gamers to confront just how narratively malnutritious, bereft of decent characters, and lacking in meaningful resonant themes so much of modern gaming really is now. But what really eats at us, I suspect, is that this sorry spectacle isn't only a window on an industry shambling toward its next crash and creative meltdown. It's also a mirror. Just a thought. A few things are guaranteed to get me excited, like any announcement having anything to do with Dragon Quest. Doesn't matter if it's a re-release, a brand new game,
Right.
A Dynasty Warriors type thing. A new movie. Or putting one of the legacy characters into Smash Brothers. Really? Still nothing? Come on, guys. Point is, I am always ride or die when it comes to Dragon Quest. I have been ever since I got my first one for free from Nintendo Power. And I will be for a long time, even though it's been at least a decade since I had the free time to actually finish one. It's one of my pure gaming happy place zones. As far as I'm concerned, the quintessential just right JRPG experience between Monster Hunter's relentless grind for grind's sake and Final Fantasy's head up its own ass melodramatic narrative fixations. So obviously I am psyched for Dragon Quest Walk, a new mobile title that aims to combine Dragon Quest classic aesthetic with Pokemon Go's well, just Pokemon Go, pretty much. Not just because I like Dragon Quest, but because I, yes, still sincerely enjoy the casual novelty of Pokemon Go, and I say that as someone who mostly missed the Pokemon phenomenon the first time around in the actual games. Now, to be honest, Dragon Quest seems like an even more natural fit for the mobile augmented reality map exploring genre than Pokemon Go ever was right off the bat. Yes, Go was successful and remains so, but it also faced early criticism for not having battles and other major focus elements of the franchise ready at launch, and instead being more of a treasure hunting and exploration game with some monster fighting than a Pokemon-centric experience. A JRPG like Dragon Quest, on the other hand, which generally features treasure hunting and exploring as main features apart from grinding, feels like a more natural fit. Plus it'll have slimes! Don't you like slimes? In all seriousness, augmented reality, or AR games, increasingly feel poised to be to the 4 and 5G mobile gaming era what the post-Super Mario Bros. Side-scroller was to home consoles in the 80s, the perfectly suited killer app of a genre that no one really saw coming, but turned out to be exactly what the medium was looking for in that moment. In this case, games that have both an active and passive mode of engaged play, effectively creating IP-themed gamified versions of smartphone and tablet's primary day-to-day functions for most people, looking at maps, organizing files, taking photos, and managing their social media. Now, as is often the case with mobile phenomenons, mainstream gaming is often quick to peg this kind of thing as having strictly vertical appeal, a big individual audience but not much room to expand outward. And Pokemon owes a bit of its inspiration in the first place to the monster capture mechanic introduced at one point in that franchise. The Minecraft AR title is a given because Minecraft is also map-oriented and ditto Mario Kart, but realistically, how many different variations on a concept can a market support? Remember what happened with MMOs? But that assumes that reskinning Google Maps with a video game is the only type of experience AR this style can be used for, which is an extremely limiting view in my estimation. Imagine, for example, a version of SimCity that allowed you to start from an augment of your own actual geographic surroundings as a foundation, or a mobile spin-off of Assassin's Creed that gave you a map of your current location as it was known to be laid out in a different century. Now that would be trippy. There's also the very now and in-the-moment possibilities afforded to the mobile console and/or PC gaming integration, as seen with Pokemon Let's Go's ability to interface with Go for some features. A beta concept now, certainly, but the potential entices. What about a game based around defined physical prowess of player character, like a sports title, a fighting game, combat sim, that kind of thing, having a corresponding mobile app encouraging players to get their steps in or perform some other worthy day-to-day exercise that would be translated as strength training to their character later on, or visiting certain locations like libraries or museums in reality afforded an intelligence stat boost in an RPG. I'm sure that mechanic does already exist somewhere, but it could be integrated further in this fashion. And remember, we're still very much in the early days of augmented reality technology. The holy grail of this stuff, being able to read and render 3D textures over and incorporate it into live-action video on the fly in order to generate actual versions of game things and real-life gags from the commercials for these titles, is still a ways off, but it's closer than ever. And once it gets here, just imagine the kind of experiences we'll be able to create. You could, for example, do a Silent Hill game where you hold up your phone and tablet and look through the screen, and suddenly the whole world looks all Silent Hill-ized, and you can look around for clues and avoid the zombies and monsters and pyramid heads and creatures. Fog. Constant sense of eyes watching you unseen from the grim hopelessness of the abyssal plain, yawning open to swallow your last shred of humanity. Okay, maybe not that one. So the last few episodes have been a little on the negative side, right? Focused on things that are not so great in the world of video games. And there's room for that, sure. A lot of problems worth covering, but there's also good stuff, and maybe it doesn't always get the right attention, partly because so much of the commentary and the problems being commented on have been coming from older grumpy guys confused by change like, well, me. So this week, sincerely, 5 whole things that are just honestly great about the new and current world of video games right the hell now. Alright, so there's sort of a meme that I'm in a small part probably responsible for helping spread, that gaming used to feel a lot more diverse than it does now because of how weird and random and, sure, throw that against the wall and see if it sticks, premises and characters were in the arcade and early console era. And the fact is, that feeling really is different than the reality. It's true that the mainstream face of big public, well-known AAA gaming has gotten streamlined and homogenized a lot as the hobby has become more expensive and established. When the big guns roll out E3 presentations, there's kind of a similar vibe that runs through things. You don't see so much of, you know, here's an army game and a block puzzle and a platformer from Japan about a snail and a baseball game and a fishing sim like you used to back in the 80s and 90s when they were just throwing whatever they had out there. But the fact is, just because the discussion space of mainstream games culture isn't as idiosyncratic as it was before, isn't indicative of the entire scene. There's a lot of interesting, unusual stuff that simply doesn't get the same kind of coverage because game media has actual metrics now, for good or ill. The fact is, there's probably never been a point in time when there's been this many new games or ways to affordably access an increasing number of vintage games in this wide of a variety. You just have to, you know, dig for it. And you can! Look, while I have a lot of issues with the move away from physical media in general, the rise of digital distribution does mean that there's never been more variety or ease of access, whether you're talking semi-obscure limited release titles, the unprecedented bonanza of independent games, and the stunning stuff that's beginning to happen in terms of retro and classic curation. I mean, did you get a load of that SNK 40th anniversary set where you can, you know, start playing from any point in a pre-recorded playthrough? It's the balls incredible collection. All 3 major consoles have some level of an online store. Almost every ubiquitous handheld device, and increasingly most other devices that can play any kind of media, have some sort of game availability in it, and also have some sort of store or application center of some kind for that, and it's been nearly the norm for a whole generation of technology. Now, there's absolutely a corresponding argument to be had about how this is affected by a class divide in many regions around disparity of internet speed availability, and that's probably going to get worse thanks to the loss of net neutrality, but at least in foundational theory, the availability of games themselves is a fact. Some people will always insist on seeing this as a problem. As far as I'm concerned, though, as nostalgic as some may be for the secret underground club atmosphere of 80s and 90s gaming, on the whole, gamers are a lot better off now that the hobby is an 8 to 80 pastime. Never mind that it's just nice that so many people can share a widely applicable common interest, but even if your gaming focus is narrowly self-interested in hardcore gaming and your own access there too, one of the reasons, for example, that dumb controversies associating games with real-world violence and threats thereto has been relegated to a relic of the reactionary past is that a mainstream culture isn't as panicked by something it actually has experience with and actively participates in. Plus, it's just, you know, nice. Don't believe me? Watch how many people get all sad when Nintendo inevitably does a mini version of the Wii in a couple of years because the big thing they remember is their grandparents really liked Wii Sports back when. Some of you are tearing up right now because you hadn't thought of that before, I can already tell. Man, when I was coming up, video games seemed like even more magic than movies or TV in terms of how these things even get made to happen. And even once you had kind of an idea of how programming and graphics worked out, it seemed damn near impossible that you'd even be actually making one unless you went to school for it, and back then there really weren't any of those around that anyone had heard of, because the resources weren't exactly out there, and those that were very basic or very arcane. But today, not only do many of the biggest games come with some sort of mess around in the sandbox and make something mechanic as an expected feature, there's just so many products and websites and programs and books and just, toys for very young kids dedicated to introducing the basics of actual game design. And that's nothing to say of whole games built around it, like the Little Big Planet franchise or Super Mario Maker. And when you combine how much more open and available the tools of game creation are becoming, with how much more varied and diverse the makeup and perspective of gamers themselves are becoming, with the increased breadth of access in general, put all that together and not only does the present look better than it generally gets credit for, the future, for this narrow thing at least, actually looks pretty decent. Hell yeah, I can! What? It's my show. One of them can be just for me. I think it's a good look. Never mind what it cost.